Okay, I'm continuing with the series of art videos. This is number 6, Belle epoch, the beautiful era, the beautiful time, the golden age of Europe, especially between 1870 to 1914, but we'll call it from 1800 to 1914. World War I was sort of the end of the beautiful age, the golden age of Europe, just as, Luther was sort of the end of the Renaissance, especially the Italian Renaissance. A couple brief introductory slides before we get into the paintings. We're going to talk especially about the life of Christ today. But here is the Acropolis, the great, magnificent achievement of the ancient Greeks, the city on a hill. And the great book of the ancient Greeks was the Iliad and the Odyssey, the Idiot and the Oddity, okay? But it was magnificent. We talked about this before. The ancient Greeks are the most magnificent civilization before Christ by a factor of like 1,000. There's nothing even close to them. And if you really want to be an educated person, you need to know more about the ancient Greeks. I've made lots of videos about them, etc. Okay, now here is sort of deep into Roman civilization and history. This is Virgil reading the Aeneid to Octavian and his wife, and basically Augustus and his wife, and she fainted during, one of the sad parts. This sort of is the great book of Rome and Roman history, okay? And Rome, we talked about it in the last video, Rome was power, but Rome was also brutality. There were a few elegant, great things of Rome, like Cicero and a few others, okay? But Rome was good at building, obviously good at military. But when you look at Rome, Rome was a bit like what communism today, somewhat collectivist, very brutal, a small aristocracy, lots and lots of slaves. And then it ended up having rulers with absolute power who could do anything. And unfortunately, some were good, but a lot of them were very corrupt. And one of the most corrupt was Nero. Nero killed his own mother, first in a collapsible boat. He tried to drown her, then she escaped, and then he had his men beat her to death. And he would have, you could, if he found and wanted to have sex with a woman, just have her family beaten and killed and then make her into a sex slave, okay? There were other Roman emperors that insisted on having a different woman every day to sleep with. Rome had become quite decadent. There was lead in the plumbing, making the people kind of stupid and irresponsible in their behavior. Caligula, one of the Roman emperors, thought it would be funny to have his horse be one of the senators, okay? And people did not like that. A lot of the emperors ended their lives with a violent death, like Caligula was assassinated. And then here is sort of a transition painting by Jean-Léon Gérôme. And all these paintings, by the way, are from the 1800s. There might be one or two that I'll add just because they need to fill out the story, but in general, these are all from the 1800s because that's kind of the point of the talk, all this magnificent art that was done in the 1800s. And this is, Augustus, sort of the empire phase of Rome. Rome had started out as a monarchy, then a republic, and then became an empire. And this can remind one a little bit of the USA, had its empire phase, and now it's descending into chaos like the fall of Rome. Okay, and I can also tell you, when I went to Amazon to try to find a book about the fall of Rome, the decline of Rome, and all this stuff, it was very difficult to find those books. There are certain things that are made hard to find, and that was one of them. Okay, but anyways, here's the birth of Christ shown simultaneously with the empire. And it's a transition phase, okay? And USA has to decide which way it's going because we're obviously in a transition phase right now. And here's a painting of the Open Bible by Vincent van Gogh, okay? And Vincent van Gogh, he made these magnificent paintings, never sold anything during his life. And I think that's part of being a Christian artist too, is you accept the fact that a lot of times, whatever you do, you're never going to make any money with it, but you still do what you can, okay? And that's partly why Christians are so much better than all other civilizations. All this multiculturalism, it's just a form of gaslighting to make you stupid and weak, okay? There's no one else who makes all this art, who makes all this literature, who does all these great, beautiful things, this sculpture, who made universities like we did. It was sort of, it sort of initiated everything. And I'm just going to share with you one little quote here because it kind of makes the point. I had this medical student who was having a hard time getting motivated. His parents sent him to talk to me. He saw the Bible on my desk and he, kind of had an arrogant look on his face. And he says, "Why do you read the Bible? It's a farce. It's ridiculous." I said, "Do you think Bach is a good composer?" And he said, "Yeah, the greatest of all time." I said, "Do you think Michelangelo is a good artist?" He goes, "Yeah, greatest of all time." I said, "Do you think Victor Hugo and Fyodor Dostoevsky, Henry Sienkiewicz, do you think they're good writers?" He goes, "Yes." And I said, "What would they be without the Bible and Christianity?" And He just sort of gave me a blank stare. I said, nothing. And he said, yeah, he understood. And that's my point. And it's one of the reasons why I'm a Christian too, is I see they're the ones that have done most of the great stuff in the world. It's almost all come from Christians. You know, the Christians have contributed about 95% of what's good in the world, or more than that. If you think I'm kidding, start studying history. You'll see it. They are the ones who developed the modern scientific method. They're the ones that made all this Renaissance art and all this other stuff. And the ancient Greeks are almost like part of Catholicism. You know, you can say the birth of Christ, but the foundational philosophy of life for Christianity, it comes out of the Western tradition of the ancient Greeks. Just like it comes out of Jesus Christ and his life, it comes more out of the ancient Greeks than you would realize if you start studying it. There's a strong connection there. You'd be surprised. Okay, and the other thing, too, is Christianity acknowledges the devil. Okay, it's for real. Here's some paintings by John Martin, an artist from England. The Fallen Angel Sent to Hell. The best version of Paradise Lost, you can watch the version where it's translated into modern English. It's very difficult to read because it's almost like Latin, even though the English is so different, so much passive voice. But the Paradise Lost, when you get the version translated into modern English, it's magnificent. Okay, here's Pandemonium and Hell. You know, Lucifer is the fallen angel, the leader of the angels, Satan presiding over his infernal council. And if you look at modern Freemasonry, when you get to the highest levels, like level 33, that is who they worship. And that's why there was all that nonsense at the Olympic Games and all that nonsense at the Emmy Awards and all this other stuff. Because the big money is supporting him. And that's why the world's so messed up today. Okay? People don't understand that because they haven't read the Bible. They don't know history. Okay, but if you read that stuff, you will see. Okay, here's one painting of the Annunciation. It's by a lady painter, Beatrice Emma Parsons. There's not that many great lady painters. I don't think there's any great lady painters, but she's a good one, okay? You know, women were always having 10 or more kids. They didn't really have a lot of time for painting. You need a lot of free time to develop these skills. Okay, the angel announcing to the shepherds the birth of Christ. Okay, now here's one of the magnificent artists of the 1800s, and this is William Bouguereau. And here is his painting of, first of all, Song of the Angels with Madonna. And it's just beautiful. I mean, it's exquisite. It's can't get any better than that. And men, we love this type of stuff. Okay, so I see these women on TV and they're like, what can I do to find a man? Well, it's like, be good, be nice. Men want innocence, goodness, and all this stuff. They want you to cook for them, run their house. I don't want you to be this modern women. We hate modern women, okay? Okay, feminists and stuff would be like, get out of here. If I dated a woman and she said she was a feminist, I would immediately end the date. Goodbye. I would not speak to her any further. Okay, they worship Satan. If you study the history of feminism, it comes out of Satanism. That is a proven fact if you read the history. Most of the women don't know that because they're ignorant, okay? But if they read and study it, what is it all about? You will see that's where it comes from. Okay, here's a painting of Innocence by William Bouguereau, okay? I made previous videos all about that, about the history of feminism. That's exactly what it is. That's not an ambiguous statement, okay? That's not an opinion. That is what it is based on history of that movement. And it has also been taken over by the Communist Party. It's part of destroying the United States, okay? So here's another magnificent painting by Bouguereau, Innocence, okay? And men will do anything for that. And that's something that women have forgotten. But if, you know, all these women, you see them on the internet, they're all unhappy and sad, these former feminists who are now getting old and they're sad because they don't have a man, they don't have a family, you know, or a broken up, messed up family. And what I'm trying to say is they don't understand men. Men want the good stuff. They don't want all this modern crap, okay? We think you look disgusting with all your tattoos and, you know, behaving like a feminist sleaze. We don't like that at all, okay? Okay, Mary, Queen of Angels in Heaven by William Bouguereau from 1900. You know, it's just beautiful. It's beyond good. It's spectacular. It's magnificent. Look at all these faces. You know, isn't that wonderful? You know, any guy would die for that, okay? All right, now here is Adoration of the Magi by Domingo Sequeira. And again, sort of beautiful light, you know, from the 1800s. There's the baby. Everyone's come to admire the baby. I mean, this is what Christianity is all about. It's all about the family. It's all about life. Okay, modernism, Satanism is all about death, abortion, and all this other craziness. Okay, the Holy Family. This is by artist in Hungary, Josef Dragan. Okay. And Hungary is a place that's not as crazy as the rest of Europe. Okay, Christ in the House of His Parents by John Everett Millay from 1850. He was one of the leaders of the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood group of painters that wanted to go back to painting of a style before Raphael, with the deeper faith, and a lot of realism too. There's John the Baptist there working with him. Here's Christ, and he begins the missionary years, calling the apostles from, like Peter and his brother and whatnot. Here is the apostles, 12 apostles being ordained by Jesus. This is a painting by James Tissot. He's a great artist, sort of a French artist who also lived in England, and he, painted the life of Christ. He was a magnificent painter. Okay, actually, and I included some songs there. This is reminding me from my book about best Christian art. Here's one of the Sermon on the Mount, the Beatitudes. Okay, again by James Tissot. Oh, and here's just a whole bunch of songs. So if you're interested in Christian music, I just took this whole list of songs because I had them. They're all magnificent. Christian music is the best music in the world by a factor of about 1,000. Over 99% of the good paintings in the world have been made by Christians. The best music in the world made by Christians. Okay? Why is it that they keep outperforming everybody else? It's because of the mentality Christianity gives them. You take a smart person from some other culture, they become Christian, all of a sudden they become a lot more productive. Okay, a perfect example is Dinesh D'Souza. Okay, makes magnificent movies, wrote excellent books, done a lot of other good things. Okay, Vishal Mangalwadi. Okay. Okay, here's a painting of Christ, and basically, Christ is about that which you do the least of my brethren, you do unto me. Protect the children, give them a good life. Everybody's equal in the eyes of God. That's what Christianity is about. Whereas, what is modern atheistic Darwinism about? Trafficking them, okay? That's what it does with them. Come on. Okay, Christ the Consolator by Carl Bloch. Carl Bloch is another great artist who made paintings about the series of the life of Christ. A lot of artists, that's what they do. They get a little older, they've sort of done their creative work, their illustrative work to make their money, and they want to do something great with their life. So they start painting the life of Christ. You'll see that's a real common pattern. Okay, here's Gustave Doré, and he made some magnificent paintings of Christ. He's got other magnificent paintings. He was a magnificent artist, Gustave Doré. And so here it is, the Valley of Tears, that only Christ will lead you out of it. And that's what you're going to find. There is nothing else. What does the left have? They're going to have drag queen story hour? They've got nothing but a culture of death and destruction and misery. All this stuff with promiscuity, modern culture, it just leads you into the gutter. It destroys your ability to think. It makes you unsuitable as a wife. It makes men into wimps. It feminizes them, makes them weak and pathetic. Mere Christianity. I made videos previously about C.S. Lewis and Mere Christianity. You'll see it's the only thing that points you and helps you to understand a good, meaningful life. It really helps to have Christian ethics. It just dramatically improves what you're capable of doing and what you're capable of enduring. That's one of the reasons why Big Dinero wants to get rid of it, because they don't want strong people. They want little, feminized wimps who they can control pretty easily. They want puppets. Okay, here's a painting of Christ with the Sermon on the Mount by Carl Bloch. Okay, this is an earlier sculpture of him. I sort of had this slide together of Christ by Bernini, magnificent sculptor. He was kind of like the Michelangelo, the next generation Michelangelo. He's just magnificent. Okay, and here's some more of the songs about Christ alone. So the Sermon on the Mount, again, what is Christ saying? He's saying, let's be good to each other. Each person's good to the people around them. Then there's a ripple effect to the people around them. And life on earth becomes a lot better. Because a lot of people try to tell me, oh, well, my church this, my church that. And I can tell you, I've read thousands of pages of Bible commentary and comparative religion stuff. And you're never going to agree on a lot of that doctrinal stuff. And Catholic Church, even though it's totally infiltrated right now, I'll come back to that topic more, but there's sort of, good news and bad news, of course, as there usually is. Here's another painting of the Sermon on the Mount, this one by Henrik Ulrich. Christ there speaking to the masses in 1890. Here's the Raising of Lazarus by Carl Bloch. Here's Behold the Man, Ecce Homo, Antonio Cesare, 1871, Christ before the crowds. And Pontius Pilate knew he was innocent. The flagellation of Christ. And, Jordan Peterson, I think he's a phony, and he denies Christ. But he did make a great quote. He said, it's the biggest tragedy ever. It was the person who was the most good, the most innocent, was treated the most unfairly, Here is Christ on the Cross by Carl Bloch. Okay, the three Marys there in James. Christ heals the blind by Tissot. Oh, I think I meant to have that in a different order. Let's see here. Yeah, I meant to have that in a different order, but oh well. Here's Christ heals the blind again, like the song Amazing Grace. Best version of Amazing Grace by a woman is Judy Collins, by a man, Paul Robeson. Instrumental by the Scottish Dragoons with the bagpipes. More stuff from the ministry years. Here's Christ healing the sick. And we talked about this too. The only thing that's going to work to reform healthcare is Christianity, Christian ethics. But the people who run healthcare, they will never allow that because it would lose money. And that's what you get when you're on atheistic Darwinism. Everything becomes about money. Okay, woman taken in adultery by Edward Corbould. Okay, and Christ says, let her live, give her another chance. Look at what a difference adultery has become. Back in the Old Testament days, a woman commits adultery, you stone her to death. Christ says, give her another chance to lead a good life and sin no more. He doesn't tell her to go back and do it. What does the modern world do? It says, divorce your husband, keep the house, and he still has to pay for the house while you continue to cheat on him with somebody. Okay? The modern system's gone too far, but it ain't done because it wants to help the families. It's done because it wants to destroy families. Okay, Christ, let him among you who is without sin cast the first stone, and none did. Who are you, she says. Mary Magdalene, no man speaks against you now, nor do I. Go and sin no more. Okay. By Emile Signal. That's the painter there. Here's the Christ casting out the money changers of the temple, the people who are abusing the place. Oh, this painting got a little bit out of order. This is the Emperor Marcus Aurelius' last words, and the throne was usurped. He wanted to give it to, the gladiator, Russell Crowe, and instead it went to Commodus. Commodus, the disaster emperor, who was really thought he was a gladiator. Okay, another Christ healing the sick. Here's with the woman at the well who slept with 5 men out of wedlock, and he's kind of telling her, you can turn your life around. John Ruskin was a great proponent of the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood and the Victorian Renaissance Catholic revival counter movements of the mid-1800s. We talked about him a little briefly. I made some videos about him. Jesus Tempted by the Devil, painting by Carl Bloch. Jesus riding into Jerusalem on a donkey. This one by Jean-Léon Gérôme, Palm Sunday. Oh, we already got this one. Here's another painting. This one by Hippolyta Flandrin of Jesus riding into Jerusalem on a donkey. The Last Supper here, painted by Carl Bloch from his illustrations of the life of Christ. Christ goes before Pontius Pilate, and Pontius Pilate talks to him, and Pontius Pilate knows he's innocent. But Pontius Pilate has to deal with a lot of pretty strong rival factions there. And then Christ Before Pilate by Michał Munkaczy. Okay. Ecce Homo, behold the man. Okay, should we let him live or should we let Barabbas live is the question that's going to be asked of the public. And the public says, crucify Christ and free Barabbas, because it so often happens, unfortunately, but the public chooses wrongly because most people are not very educated. What I've seen is that most people, they don't know anything and they're very conformist. So if you exert peer pressure on them, you can very easily get them to do anything. People look at the 1930s and say, why did they do so many bad things? And I'm like, they do the same thing nowadays. Look at the public schools. They castrate children. All you got to do is create a euphemism. Oh, this is gender-affirming surgery. No, you're castrating a child, somebody who doesn't have any ability to make an informed decision. Okay, and they're trying to take away parental consent. Well, what I'm trying to say is they're drugging children with amphetamines, and they go, well, it's a medication for treatment of attention deficit disorder. It's BS, okay? So it takes a person who's knowledgeable and wants to do the right thing. And you need Christian ethics so that you can do the right thing and not be affected by money. Because peer pressure and money make people do the wrong thing all the time. And I hate to say it, I wish it wouldn't have happened in the USA. But it will happen in the USA. I'm sorry to say that. Look at the stuff from the research of Ash Solomon. You found that 9 out of 10 people will intentionally lie if there's peer pressure to do that. So you need strong people. You need noble masculinity. Okay, that's noble masculinity with Christian ethics is what can preserve things good. Okay, almost every other situation, atheistic Darwinism, people just go for the money, for the convenience, the expedience. That's why you need it, and that's why The big dinero hates it, okay? Here's Pilate washing his hands of the decision about to crucify Christ. Okay, and then Christ also has said, remember this, if the world hates you, they hated me first. He who denies me, I shall deny him. He who acknowledges me before my Father, I shall acknowledge him. Oh, this is a more modern painting, but I think it's great, by a painter by the name of John McNaughton. And, he's got, Marx in the audience, and Stalin's in the audience, and Mother Teresa, Joan of Arc, there's Stalin. Okay, it's a rather spectacular painting. There's a lot of other famous people in the other. There's Stalin, there's John Paul II, and there is sort of like, Joe Six-Pack America. What will you do when you will face this question? Okay, oh, there's Henry VIII back there. There's some other people you know. Okay, another painting of Via Dolorosa, this one by Eugene Bernan, 1904. And Simon the Cyrenian carrying the cross there. Jesus meets his mother on the Via Dolorosa as he falls again. Okay, Simon the Cyrenian is being sort of asked and somewhat forced maybe by the Romans to help take up the cross, and we all must take up our cross. Great song by Sam Cooke, Must Jesus Bear This Cross Alone? That's one of the best. That's the best gospel music ever. Is that Sam Cooke and the Soul Stirrers with that song on it? Okay, here's a painting of the Crucifixion by Jan Stajka. This has been called the Polish Sistine Chapel. It's rather magnificent. Other great songs: Sam Cooke and Johnny Cash versions of "Were You There When They Crucified My Lord?" Okay, this is a giant painting. There's Christ right there. Here it is in auditorium, how big it is. You get the relative size from these seats. It's magnificent. Here's the raising of the cross, and sort of like, that idea of man is created in the image of God, therefore man is like God in his own extent. He can be a creator like God, and God created the universe in a rational way, therefore the universe is rational, and we're like God, so we can try to understand it. So it creates a desire to do real science, to try to understand things. The commandments, thou shalt not lie, motivates you to tell the truth, and you have to act in a way that you think Christ would approve of your conduct as best you're able to. So it gets people to behave better. They're not going to become saints, that ain't human nature, but they're going to behave a lot better than they otherwise would. Again, painting Raising of the Cross by James Tissot. Here's Christ on the Cross by Carl Bloch. Here's a crucifixion of Christ and the two thieves. The good thief asked forgiveness, and he was forgiven. And the Protestants use that to say, well, you don't have to do good deeds. You can just have faith. Okay, whereas the bad thief did not. The good thief found the right. But, there's more to it than that. In life, you got to do good things too. We're not going to get into all that, the Book of James and all that stuff, but that's part of one part of that debate. Here's Mary at the foot of Christ, the reformed prostitute. And she turned her life around. And anybody could turn their life around. That's what's great about Christianity, is it lets you turn your life around. Also, all this BS about racism, they could shove it out their butts. Everybody wants to move to Christian countries. Christianity welcomes everyone. You go to these other countries, they don't want you. They say, get the hell out of here. You're not one of our people, one of our country. Get out of here. Christianity says everybody's welcome. Just acknowledge Christ, and everybody's welcome. Anybody can become a Christian the same day. There's no big ceremony or anything. What I'm trying to say is it's the most welcoming thing in the whole world, okay? And Christ will forgive anybody if they're sincerely repentant, okay? So all these criticism of it, they're BS, all right? Here's Christ on the Cross, this one by Michał Munkaczy. Here's the strike of the lance into the side of Jesus. This painting is again by James Tissot. Longinus, the Roman centurion, said, surely this man was the Son of God. The more you study Christianity, the more you will like it. It's much better than you think. And people who say, oh, it's unscientific, you don't know. Wait till you study it. I studied the medical Bible, biochemistry stuff backwards and forwards for 40 years, and I can tell you, only God could explain it. It's way, 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 way too complicated and too magnificent. to not have been designed by some type of superior intelligence. Crucifixion of Christ by Vasily Golinsky, 1895. Before the communist stuff in 1918 in Russia, they used to have good artists, good writers, good painters. After that, they stink at everything. That's what communism does, destroys everything. Okay, here is Jesus being carried to the tomb, again by James Tissot, the painting. Oh, if you're interested in learning more about this is the book to read, The Case for Christ. It's also a movie. It's also an audio CD book. It's magnificent. It's great. I read tons of Christian apologetic stuff. This is the best book. It's real, fast, concise, accurate, and entertaining. Okay, Burial of Christ by Carl Bloch. Okay. Easter, the big comeback holiday. Great song is He Has Risen by Keith Green. Okay, this is a painting by Mikhail Nestorov. I think he was a Russian artist. And this is the road to Emau with the disciples. Supper at Emau. Okay, the Ascension of Christ into Heaven 40 days after the resurrection by Gustave Doré. Again, he's just a beautiful, magnificent painter there, isn't he? Okay, now here's the Light of the World, Christ Knocks. This is William Holman Hunt, one of the pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood. And so basically, you have to open the door from the inside. There's no handle on the outside. Christ knocks, you either let him into your life or you don't. Okay, here's St. Peter preaching in the catacombs. Okay, painted by Jan Stajka, the great Polish artist. Here is the Christians being sent into the Colosseum, the martyrs, by Nero. Okay, painting by Konstantin Flavitsky, 1862. Domini Quo Vadis, Jesus, Where Are You Going? By Annabelle Carracci, 1602. And I just show this paintings because St. Peter was leaving the city of Rome, sort of fleeing the persecution. And Christ said, I am going back to Rome because you have betrayed your people. I'm going back to Rome to be crucified again. And then St. Peter said, I'm sorry, and he returned back to Rome, and he met his fate. But the extraordinary thing about the disciples is 10 out of the 12 were crucified, and the other two didn't have it easy either. They had a lot of problems. I mean, we're martyred, is what I meant to say. Here's from the book Quo Vadis, which is, about that, related to that thing with St. Peter. Oops, I wanted to move myself. And it's a magnificent movie. It's one of the all-time greatest books ever written about the psychology of a man and woman and the difference between the Romans and the Christians. It's extraordinary. Okay, I'll get myself off the picture here. And this is Nero. He burned down a whole bunch of the city of Rome that he wanted to build new things on it. And then he just blamed it on the Christians. And like I said, there's modern parallels to that, as you well know, like look at Hawaii. Okay, here is Gustave Doré painting The Triumph of Christianity over Paganism. Sort of a beautiful celebratory painting chasing out the pagan gods. Okay. Here's a painting of The Vision of the Christian Church by Caspar David Friedrich. And this, I think, has a special symbolism because right now what's happened is the left has infiltrated the church and they're destroying the church from inside. And it's a combination of things. Because they don't allow priests to get married, people have small families, there's a high rate of homosexuality in the church, a high rate of pedophilia, a high rate of alcoholism, okay? The only thing that's really going to make the Catholic Church good is if noble masculinity takes it over. But they're not going to allow noble masculinity to take it over. So I don't think it's going to be able to fix itself. And right now, Christianity, in a sense, is a bit of a grassroots underground movement, if you will. Because also there's that 503 exemption rule, which doesn't allow them to say anything in anything interesting in church, otherwise they lose their tax exemption. And so because of that, almost all the priests stink. They almost never have any interesting sermon to have, and men find church very boring, okay? And Christians, in my experience, are very mentally kind of weak. What I mean by that, for example, I've written the best book ever written about Christian art. I summarize all the Christian music. There's not a single Christian YouTube channel that would interview me. What I've seen with Christians is they're jealous, they're competitive, and they don't help each other very much. And you may think that's no big deal, but they're being genocided, and one of the reasons they're being genocided, why is it that the biggest religion in the world, like 2.3 billion people, is rapidly, aggressively being genocided? Because they don't help each other. Okay, and they're stupid. I mean, look at Ukraine. It's the biggest joke in the world. The purpose of Ukraine is to get rid of the white Christian Ukrainian men. That's the purpose of it. Everything else is nonsense. Both sides knew exactly what would happen and wanted it to happen. And, why hasn't it stopped? I thought it was going to maybe stop. Okay, here is from the book of Revelations, this painting right here. The four men, horsemen of the apocalypse. You know, the white is conquest or pestilence and plague. The red horse, so here's the white horse, here's the red horse. War, possibly civil war. Here's the black horse of famine. Scales are weighed to ration food. Right there's the scales. Pale horse on a pale horse. A pale rider on a pale horse, that's death. You know, supposedly in the book of Revelations, 1/4 of the population is going to lose their life. It's going to be a lot more than that, unfortunately, the way things are going. This is by a Russian artist in 1887. Okay, they were still capable of this sort of thing. Here's a couple lines from the book of Revelations, chapter 6, verses 1 to 8. When the Lamb opened one of the seals, and I heard one of the creatures saying with a voice like thunder, "Come and see." And I looked and beheld a white horse. He who sat upon it had a bow, and a crown was given to him, and he went on to conquer. Another horse, fiery red, went out, and it was granted to one who sat on it to take peace from the earth, and there was given to him a great sword. Yeah, more war. Great. Then a horse, a black horse, and he who sat on it had a pair of scales in his hands, like we said, rationing for food. And then a pale horse and a pale rider, like death. Okay, the Grim Reaper. Okay, so that's all kind of depressing. I tell you, I've read like thousands of pages of Bible commentary, and unfortunately, I see a lot of contradictions. I see some that predict, you know, good things for the Christians and things are going to get better and Christ is going to come again. And I see other ones who are top-notch scholars who say, no, it's almost the opposite. All of the Christians are going to be massacred in a big genocide. And then Christ is going to decide later who goes to heaven or not. And I'm like, oh, that doesn't sound good. So I don't know what's going to happen. I'm not sure what's going to happen. But I do know this, you know, a feminized, weakened culture that doesn't know its own history doesn't have much ability to survive. So hopefully that'll change. When I've seen small cultures that were able to survive, they tended to be like a hydra. Every one of them sort of was tough and respected their history, their culture, their survival, their group, etc. And you'd have to get rid of all of them to get rid of any of them in a sense. But, you know, the modern Christian man is weak, feminized. He's, you know, put in a verbal cage. Oh, you're racist, you're homophobic, you're xenophobic. It's like, piss off, you know. No one except for the Western Christian countries is having their rulerships taken over and actively destroyed to genocide the native people. That's what's happening in all the Western Christian countries. Okay, and okay. So, anyways, that's all I've got for today. I hope you found that interesting.